Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my Day 1 Worlds Play-ins overview and analysis of all 8 games that we saw today. And yes, I mean today, as I'm recording this approximately 30 or so minutes after the end of DRX and RNG at the end of the day. So definitely going to be getting my fresh thoughts, my fresh reactions. That can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing, but definitely still had enough time. I watched all these games, tried to look back on them objectively before talking about them, and it's time to give my analysis of what ended up happening here today on Day 1 of Worlds. So if you are excited for this video, please go ahead and let me know down in the comment section below. Obviously, you guys have really been enjoying the Worlds content. I can tell because you're consuming it super highly, and the likes have been out of this world, and I really want to just say thank you to you guys. You've certainly made the Worlds process a lot more fun with your enthusiasm, with your differing opinions, all that stuff. We're going to go over where some of those opinions looked good today, where some of my opinions looked bad today, because it is a little bit of both. But obviously, you know, spoiler alert, I think I come out of this day looking pretty good. And everything in between, I'm just excited to have Worlds content in front of me. So if you are excited as well, let me know down in the comment section below. But let's go ahead and jump right into the reviews. If you watched my playoff review videos for all 4 of the major regions, they're going to be structured in a very similar way. We're going to be going over all 8 games from day 1, game by game, giving out a player of the game, a dud of the game for every single one, going over the pluses, the minuses, everything in between from all of the games. And so let's go ahead and kick it off here with the first game of Worlds, and I was incredibly excited about this because not only did we have a major region team playing, but we also had the hometown team playing. Of course, North America being the host for all of Worlds this year, but Mexico City being the host for play-ins means that LLA gets a little bit of a home field boost in round 1, and unfortunately in game number 1, it didn't matter as much as Isurus Gaming could not defeat the Mad Lions in our first game of Worlds. And up on the screen right now, you're going to see kind of the updated version of my game recap screen. Obviously, like I said, if you had followed from the playoff series, you'll kind of know the format of this, but we did tweak a few things. We added a few things here. Obviously, Dragons and Barons are now on here, as well as pick order. Pick order being on the top and on the bottom, kind of showing the order in which all of these things went off the board. Maybe gives you a clearer idea of where their thought process was during draft. But let's go ahead and jump right into the game analysis, and you've got to count this as a huge win for Mad Lions in game number 1 because they did look pretty good. Now, it wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They were pretty good in the early game, the like pre-5 minute mark. They were making plays. El Yoyo was looking pretty good. Niski got a free first blood in the bot lane, or in the bot river, just because Jelly walked up for no reason with no vision all the way up and just died. I really don't know what he was trying to do, but it definitely wasn't a good play. Niski basically gets a free first blood and is able to control the laning phase from there on the Talia. Overall, draft-wise, I should note, I do like both of these drafts for the most part. A lot of these picks, if you want to hear about them more in detail, I did detail my meta report, and pretty much all of these picks are on it. The only exception that I certainly didn't see being as high prio as it was over the course of all of today was Graves in the jungle. Graves actually was a huge pick for a lot of carry junglers in the meta today. I thought it was just going to be more of a solo queue oriented pick, but he certainly has been showing up in play-ins as a more carry style jungler, and honestly, I think it makes a lot of sense for the meta. A few picks showed up today that I'm going to talk about maybe not being as high prio throughout the rest of the tournament. Maybe some things we're going to see fall off. I do not expect Graves to be that. I actually think he might be something that a lot of good teams end up going to, because like I said, it's going to be a jungle carry meta. It's going to be jungle oriented meta. If you can get Graves really online, you can make games very difficult to close out, even from behind, and we kind of saw that here in the first game here. Like I said, the early game kind of went towards Mad Lions, but the mid game was really starting to spiral out of control. Some really good fights from Grell here on the Graves, and overall, I thought he looked phenomenal. He got that first pick Graves on blue side, and he did a lot with it. He was keeping them in this game over and over and over again. Obviously, some really good ultimates from Jelly to set up some bullet times from the Misfortune, a combo that we saw a ton in Spring, and I expect to see a ton at Worlds here as well. Those 3 were really carrying a lot of the damage, but Saya was also playing really well on this Lissandra, just constantly in a good position. The ultimates were absolutely huge, and the stuns could be important as well. And so, honestly, Isurus was playing the mid game relatively well, even things up. Then we finally get into the late game. It felt like Mad finally turned on their brain. They were like, oh wait, we're actually playing at Worlds and we're playing a good team. We can't just take it easy. And they really started to put their foot on the gas, and a lot of that was the top two members of this team, both Armut and Elyoya, really stepping up towards the back half of the game. I was actually very critical of Elyoya's mid-game here. I don't think he handled it well at all. Grell outplayed him for the majority of that mid-game, keeping Isurus in the game, but overall, Elyoya finally figured out that he's on Hecarim and that he can dive the Misfortune if she locks herself into ultimate and he's not hit by the Amumu ult. Once he had that revelation that he could just press R on the MF and she'd have to run away, the game became a lot easier, I would say, overall for Mad Lions. And so, Elyoya doing a lot to impact the game in the later stages, I would say. And then Armut, honestly, was phenomenal on this Gnar. A ton of damage coming out from this Gnar pick. I talked about how I thought the top lane tank matchups were going to be a little bit more prevalent at this World Championship than maybe some of the carry-oriented matchups. We definitely saw a little bit of both, definitely more in the direction of tanks, though. We saw that here in Game 1, both tanks in the top lane, but Gnar did so much in this game to be proactive, and that's the reason that Armut is actually going to get my player of the game here in game number 1 at Worlds. He was the player on this Mad Lions team that I was certainly the most critical of over the course of the year. I did not give him an all-pro vote. In fact, I was very critical of him in the regular season. I thought he was a big reason why Mad Lions was losing a lot of the games that they were losing in the regular season. Obviously, playoffs was very different, but he really stepped up in this game, was able to get on his signature Gnar pick, obviously pretty much the only thing he's played to any level of success throughout the regular season so far, and he does deliver on it. I don't expect this pick to be given to Mad Lions all that much throughout the rest of the tournament, but you never know. Some teams always lack in draft, and Armut does play the Gnar very well. It's just more about the champions that are going to be a little bit lower on the totem pole after the Gnar, but yeah. Armut played well. Like I said, Elyoya played well. His invades early were really good. They set up a lot for Mad Lions, and he was able to create a lot of pressure along with Niski for both the Rift Herald and the Dragons that they were able to start stacking early. But like I said, really felt like he got out-pressured towards the mid-game, stepped it up towards the back half when he realized that all he needed to do to win team fights was just ult the Misfortune, and there was really nothing Isurus could do to peel him off, and then it really became an easy game. So Elyoya looking good, would certainly like to see more consistency throughout the game, but overall fine. Niski was good. I wouldn't say he was great, but he was good. Honestly, Seiya outplayed him in the mid-game as well. I was really looking forward to Niski being in this meta, really being able to open up the map again on Taliyah, a pick that he's been very good on throughout most of the year. Obviously, with Sylas getting some nerfs, with Azir getting some nerfs, we're probably going to go to that more supportive shove and roam style mid laner that has been prevalent throughout most of Summer Split, and that does benefit Niski, I would say, overall, but he didn't look nearly as good in this game as I would have wanted him to. I really wanted him to dominate a player like Seiya, who I've always called, like, Latin American's Bjergsen. He's very similar, in my opinion, in playstyle. If you know what people tend to, quote-unquote, not like about Bjergsen, then you probably know what I think about Seiya. He's a very good carry mid laner that likes to function through the mid lane, likes to make a little bit safer plays, doesn't really play all that aggro or all that roam-oriented, just likes to scale into the late game. Now, he can actively carry games. In my opinion, he's the best player on that Isurus team, but a player like Niski should be able to shove and open up the map a lot for the rest of his team, especially his jungler, and that just wasn't happening in this game. I'm looking for more from him throughout the rest of the tournament. And then Unforgiven and Kaiser, I don't want to say too much. Obviously, I'm not going to talk too much about the sickness stuff that's been going around. A lot of players have to be isolated when they play these games because of a COVID outbreak at the tournament. Unforgiven and Elyoya were two of those players. I'm not going to say that caused a ton of problems, but just watching the cameras, you could see that there was a little bit of an issue with Unforgiven, and you really hope that doesn't affect him throughout most of the tournament. They just put him on the Seraphine here. He does what he needs to do. He hits the ultimates, and that's what really matters in the end, but outside of that, wasn't really offering too much. And then Kaiser was good towards the back half of the game. A little bit surprised to see the high priority on Leona, but I do understand it. If you do want to go for these more engaged style support, she's certainly not bad. I was just surprised to see Leona prioritize this game over something like a Nautilus, which I would just expect to do her job, but a little bit better. Overall, good game from Mad Lions. Okay game from Isurus. Honestly, as the team that was coming into this tournament as my last ranked team at the tournament, they didn't look bad at all in this game. Like I said, Grell looked really good and was honestly in a spot where he was looking like he was going to be able to 1v5 throughout a lot of this mid game. Unfortunately, just got to the point where he wasn't getting that secondary damage from the Misfortune ult, from the Amumu ult coming in, and then from the Lissandra. He really had to do a lot of it on his own, and Graves just isn't strong enough in the meta right now to be able to do that by himself. He's a great carry, but he does need a little bit of other damage. And like I said, once Elyoya realized he can ult the MF, it was pretty much game over for Isurus because they didn't have that secondary damage source. MF was forced out of a lot of fights. Lissandra, Amumu, Ornn, these aren't picks that are going to really be able to help out Graves in terms of cleaning up the enemy team, and we really saw that towards the back half of the game, but you can't fault Grell for that. He played phenomenal, and honestly, this was a star-making performance. This is something that really reminds me of a player like Jose Deodo from a couple of years ago at Worlds, where he popped off so much to the point where he got a spot in the LCS. Not going to say that's going to happen for Grell or anything, but this was very much a coming out party for the Latin American jungler. And then you got to give a lot of credit to Gavoto and Jelly in the bottom lane, who, Jelly, shout out, he ran it down for the first minute of the game. Not really sure what he was thinking there at all, if I'm being honest, but he played the rest of the game really, really well. Those Amumu ults can be super impactful, and obviously, Curse of the Sad Mummy into Bullet Time is a well-known, unbeatable combination if the Amumu can get it off, because that damage is completely free, and boy, did that damage cause some havoc in the mid-game, especially around the Baron fight, which was unbelievably won by Isurus. A great fight from them overall, but they just weren't able to hold on. The damage, like I said, wasn't consistent enough throughout the game. And then there's ADD in the top lane. Unfortunately, he is going to get my dud of the game here. He was just not good. Another player that had to be isolated because of contracting COVID. You really hope that's not affecting everybody's play too much, but ADD did not have a good performance here. A lot of people may be familiar with him from his old LCK days, his old OGN days. Obviously has transitioned to a lot of different regions at this point. Was playing in OS, was playing in Brazil, is now in Latin America. Has kind of made the tour here, and he just wasn't what he needed to be in this game. He really needed to make sure that Arma didn't get online. And unfortunately, that Ornn towards the back half of the game was just paper. He was dying so incredibly quickly. The ults were not consistent. The tank stats were not consistent. Yes, he was giving stats over to everybody else, but that was really the value that ADD was offering this game. He absolutely needs to play better if Isurus is going to have a shot at being able to take down some of the other teams in this group. But overall, not a bad showing from a team that, like I said, I expected to be the last place team in this group and at this tournament. Overall, I thought they definitely stepped up and at least showed some positives. Unfortunately, they weren't able to close the deal, but for Mad Lions, you're going to be happy that they were able to come out of game number 1 with a win, which should have been expected, even though it was a little bit trickier than maybe you wanted it to. Hopefully, this team can continue to grow and get hopefully healthier as the tournament goes on and maybe get that cohesion up a bit. It really does not feel like the regular season Mad Lions. It very much feels a lot closer to playoff Mad Lions, and I'm really not sure European fans want to hear that. Moving on to game number 2 now, and game number 2 was one that everybody was excited for. Obviously, I'm really glad we kicked off Worlds with the hometown team, the LLA Isurus Gaming, being able to play in the first game, but the other hometown boys, North America, get game number 2, and they get to kick off the tournament against their rivals in Europe, and one of the most prestigious organizations in the region. So, for game number 2, we had a matchup between Fnatic and Evil Geniuses, and unfortunately for NA, they did not even come close in this one. A complete and utter stomp for Fnatic, as they are able to take game number 1 in their tournament quest here. Now, obviously, if you're on this channel, you're probably not learning from me that Fnatic's been through quite a bevy of roster problems over the past week or so. Both Upset and Hylissang, their bot lane, contracted COVID right before coming to the event, so they couldn't scrim, they couldn't play with the team. They thought they weren't going to be able to play either of them through the first couple games of the play-ins. Upset is able to get ready and get there on time, and he is able to play, obviously, with all of the COVID precautions. Hylissang still not able to be in the country for the tournament, though. So, Fnatic Academy, Fnatic Rising support Rux, comes in to play his first ever, major league game here at Worlds. Again, it's only Fnatic that can have this happen 2 years in a row, with Bean last year, almost Bean again this year, and then Rux, but boy, did it look good for Rux to come in here. You can talk all you want about Hylissang being a positive for this team, and obviously his aggression is great for them, but he also had major issues for this Fnatic team this year. At moments, he was actively losing them games along with Humanoid. Rux comes in and really gives you a lot of the good parts of what Hylissang gave you, and had none of the flaws, at least in this game. I'm not saying Rux is a better player. I'm certainly not saying that Hylissang shouldn't be playing over him, but man, was Rux good in this game. Good enough for me to very confidently, in my opinion, give him my player of the game here. And that's not just because he came in and dominated as a substitute with like 4 days notice. It's because, in my opinion, he genuinely was the most impactful player in this game. You could make the argument that it was misfortune, and I certainly wouldn't be like that opposed to Upset getting player of the game, but man, was Rux good on this Leona, and overall, this comp really needed him to be because he was there engaged. You have a Misfortune, you have a Victor, you have a Graves that's going to be doing a lot of damage, but you need somebody to be able to initiate those fights, and that was a lot on Rux, and boy, did he deliver, especially going into EG's comp, which is very aggressive and very risky. You've got the Caitlyn Lux, which obviously was super buffed on this patch, one of the top bot lanes for a lot of teams on this patch. EG gets that and dominates in the early game, but aren't able to transition their lead. They go for the aggressive top side as well with the Renekton, trying to balance it out with scaling picks like the Sylas, like the Viego, but overall, it doesn't end up working out. They're not able to generate the same kind of lead that they want to, due to some poor plays in the early to mid game from JoJo and from Inspired, and then from that point onwards, Upset just takes off. Rux is able to create so much chaos in this game overall for Fnatic, and Upset's able to capitalize on all of it to have a dominant win for Fnatic. A great showing from this bot lane, and if they can look like this throughout the entirety of the tournament, like if Hylissang can come in and they're rolling like this, they're going to be way better than where I had them in my power rankings. I think I had them 12th in my power rankings. They're going to be way higher than that. They're not a C-tier team if their bot lane is playing like this, because I think they would even give RNG and DRX a little bit of the run for their money with this bot lane playing like this, because they were genuinely phenomenal. Even losing early, basically from 7 minutes on against Caitlyn Lux, they were able to generate a push because of some of the events that were going on around the map, and they never gave up control from there. Phenomenal from both of these players, and you gotta give it to both of them. Like I said, if you want Rux as player of the game, if you want Upset as player of the game, they both deserve it here. I think you got to give a lot of credit to Razork and Humanoid as well. Both of them did play phenomenally in the early game here. A big reason why Fnatic was able to get that bot lane so online for them to dominate basically the rest of the game, because Razork and because Humanoid played so well in the early to mid game, really heavily outplaying both Inspired and Jojo Pyun. Obviously, a little bit of a nerve-wracking performance, I imagine, for Jojo Pyun. The 17-year-old kid at his first World Championships here doesn't quite get the entrance that he wants, doesn't quite body Humanoid in the way that he wants. Gets the Sylas pick into Victor, which can be fine overall as long as you're able to dictate tempo. Most of the time, you want to shove and roam. That's really the thing that Sylas is really good at right now. And Viego is someone that you can invest into and create a good advantage, even though he wasn't on my meta report, and I don't think he's all that great right now. I certainly think that he's in a position to be able to win you games. Unfortunately, Humanoid was able to get the giant push on Jojo because range versus melee is really difficult if you don't have the shove. And especially if you get down in levels, Humanoid is really just going to be able to take advantage and poke you out under tower every single chance that he gets. And that leaves Inspired in a really tough spot because Razork is going to play aggressive because he does have backup from his mid laner, which EG just doesn't simply have on that side. Overall, Razork does get a little bit over-aggressive in the mid game, and Inspired is able to get a little bit of gold off of it, but it never really matters. Razork and Humanoid control that jungle mid duo so hard. I was really rooting for this EG jungle mid to prove a lot of people wrong. Obviously, the Cubby meme has been going around for months and months now, but they are a really good jungle mid duo, and I was really hoping they would show up here, but unfortunately, not the game for them overall. And then Wonder versus Impact, I don't even really want to talk about it. It was Aatrox versus Renekton, and absolutely nothing happened. It did not matter. I don't really feel like I need to talk about it. Overall, really good game from Fnatic, not a good game from EG. You need to see a turnaround. Obviously, Kaori and Vulcan definitely need to get better on the same page. They were able to dominate like the early game. I think around 5 or 6 minutes, they were up 20 or so CS, but once the map started falling apart for Inspired and Jojo, that lead started to come crumbling down into the bottom lane, and once Upset and Rux, like I said, had that lead, EG was just never in a position to take it back. Vulcan was now running it down, mispositioned a lot towards the back half of the game. Kaori had zero impact on anything in this game overall, and you could say the same thing about pretty much everybody else in EG. Like I said, Jojo really outplayed by Humanoid. Melee versus range is hard, but if you can get the shove as Sylas, you're going to be so much more useful as that champion overall as long as you scale, but you just never got to that point because you got outplayed. And then for Inspired, he didn't have the backup that he needed on that Viego pick to really be able to take on the Graves in the way that was essential for this comp to roll. Impact 0-0-0 in the top lane. What else do I really need to say about that? Overall, not a good game from EG. You definitely are going to need a turnaround. This is about as disastrous of a start to Worlds as North America can get. But I do have faith in this EG team to turn it around. I still picked them to get second in groups even after I heard the Fnatic news. I never thought that they were going to be able to win this game easily or even at all. I had Fnatic the whole way through, and that definitely came to fruition, but I still have faith that EG is going to be able to pretty cleanly take the number 2 spot in this group even after these games, but it is going to require a lot of turnaround from a team that didn't show a lot of fire in this game number 1. For Fnatic, just keep this pace up. Obviously, Rux isn't going to play the whole tournament, but if Upset plays like this, if Humanoid plays like this team is going to be significantly better than a lot of people expected them to be. Maybe they'll even hit their potential that a lot of people had from them at the beginning of the year. This could be one of the best teams in the West, if not the best team in the West, but they're going to have to keep this pace up. Upset played like an absolute madman. He is the focal point for Fnatic. If he can play like the best, like one of the top 5 to 7 AD carries in the world, then this team is going to be a lot better than people account them for. And overall, I'm really hoping for that because the Fnatic that we got in this one was genuinely breathtaking. Moving on to game number 3 now, and game number 3 was certainly an interesting one where we had some major region teams duking it out in the first couple of games with Mad Lions, Fnatic, and Evil Geniuses. We had 2 quote-unquote minor region teams finally get the chance to shine here on the world stage. Obviously one in a little bit of an asterisk because it is the PCS, but we did have a fun third matchup between the winners of the CBLOL in Loud and the second place finishers in the PCS, Beyond Gaming. And this certainly was an interesting matchup because these 2 teams actually match up fairly interestingly into each other, where I think they have definitely strengths and weaknesses on other sides of the map, where I really think that Beyond loves to run through their mid lane. Loud really likes to run through their bot lane. 2 styles that are definitely a little contradictory in how they work, but obviously the meta is going to determine how well those styles are impacted, and at least for this game number 1, Beyond was really able to do whatever they wanted to. Now, there certainly was decisions made. There were decisions made in this game, and I'm going to get to them. I usually never talk about builds. Anybody who follows this channel knows I'm not one to talk about builds. Builds overall are important, but they're really not that important in the grand scheme of things. They're really just not. You can oftentimes build the wrong items on champions and still get 80 to 85% of what that champion is supposed to be, and if you're the better player, you can make that work, even if you don't have the perfect build. But when your build is so atrocious that it actively causes your champion to be almost useless for the midsection of the game, there's certainly something to be said about that, and unfortunately, that's what it feels like happened to Croc this game with the Hecarim. Really no idea what the idea of this no mythic build on Hecarim is. Overall, I think there are so many mythics that actively give you so much, even though people are complaining about Sunderer, and I understand. People don't read the patch notes. I understand that it's not good, but even Sunderer is probably better than whatever the hell this hodgepodge of a build is. I'm not going to linger on it too long, but man, were some decisions made there. But that's really outside of Beyond's control. What did Beyond do right in this game? Well, they just played really aggro. They were playing really fast from the get-go, something I was actually a little bit worried about for Beyond and for a lot of the PCS teams in general, because PCS felt very slow to me in comparison to a lot of the other minor region teams. I was a little bit worried that going into this tournament, they weren't going to be able to keep up with some of the pacing of the other teams, but I did have Loud as one of the few teams that I did not expect Beyond to just be worse than. That's not to say Beyond's a bad team, but I had them as 5th in this group. I had Loud as 6th in this group, and through the first game here, it looks pretty good for these 2 teams because Beyond looked really good. They were able to play around their mid-jungle duo, kind of the strategy that they've gone to throughout the year. If you watched my group primer, you will know that Minji was really the guy for Beyond Gaming throughout the year. They give him the counter pick on red side. They give him the LeBlanc. Into this Azir pick, again, another thing that's been nerfed and really isn't nearly as good. We see Tinones bring it out here, mostly probably for mid lane dominance to try to be able to take over that lane phase, but really easily counterable here with the LeBlanc, who can just play super duper safe for the early part and is going to be very difficult to actively deal with in the mid game if you are able to get some gold on her, and what do you know? You're able to get some gold on her. This Jax was often in position to just be shut down by Husha in the top lane. The Hecarim, the Azir really weren't doing anything. The Nautilus engages were never going anywhere. Overall, there were a ton of opportunities for Beyond to be able to collect gold, and whether they, I don't want to say earned it or not, because they're here as a Worlds team, but whether it was in their control or not, they were able to pick up a lot of advantages from that, and Minji, I think, was the biggest recipient of that. I'm not the biggest fan of a LeBlanc pick overall because I just don't feel like she has enough damage to justify going to her as your main mid lane assassin. I think picks like Ahri, picks like Akali, as we'll see later in the day, I think can accomplish that goal and offer you more of a variety of ways to accomplish that goal. Yes, LeBlanc is very safe and is very easy to play on, especially if you have experience on her, but I don't think the upside of LeBlanc is going to be nearly as high as a lot of the other quote-unquote assassin meta champions right now. Overall, LeBlanc is good, but her damage, you really need to be super far ahead for her damage to be more than negligible, I would say, in most team fights, and luckily for Beyond, Minji did get to that point in the mid game where he was just so far ahead that he was able to one-shot the Azir. He was able to one-shot the Seraphine if he was able to get on her. So overall, you do hit that power spike, but you gotta give a lot of credit for hitting that to Husha as well in the jungle, because really, really great pathing game from him was just out-jungling Croc basically from the beginning. Obviously, Croc going that awful build doesn't help the case, but Husha did a great job going top lane and punishing Robo for playing super aggressive in this Jax Fiora matchup, and trust me, this isn't the last time that we're going to see these two champions on the Rift today, which I was very surprised about, but we certainly saw a lot of jungle intervention from Beyond's side up in that top lane, really punishing the Jax from going over aggressive. Once he jumps in, he really doesn't have an easy way to get out if he doesn't have everything else up, and especially someone like Sejuani can really punish that with the layering of CC that she can offer with Fiora kind of backing her up in that instance. So overall, those two combined for a really deadly duo in the mid game here. That definitely worked out. Waco and Kino, while they weren't like the focal points of this game, and while I'm really not the biggest fan of a Kai'Sa Amumu lane, I really don't see the kind of synergy there that you're really going to need. Obviously, Amumu has a ton of CC, and generally that's just good for Kai'Sa, but she can't really follow up on the big ultimate with this giant burst of damage. She's much more likely to need a lot more time than that, and I think Amumu just doesn't offer that the same way that a pick like Nautilus or even a Leona can offer that. Obviously, he works really well with champions like Misfortune because of the ridiculous amount of damage that you can put out as MF if you are able to lock down a group of targets. Kai'Sa just doesn't have that same kind of offering. So even though I don't love the lane combination there, they were able to get to that late game. The Seraphine did have lane control, I think, for most of this laning phase because Brance, in my opinion, is the better bot laner. But once you get to that late game with a fed LeBlanc, a super fed Sejuani, a Fiora that's going to be in side lanes, you're going to be able to get a lot, and Waco and Kino certainly didn't make the mistakes needed in order to throw that lead for Beyond. But overall, great game from Beyond. Minji's my player of the game. Husha, very close second. For Loud, this was not what you wanted to see. This is not how you want to kick off the tournament because this was a bad showing, and this is kind of what I was worried about with Loud and why I had them ranked so low in my power rankings is because the variance of this team is definitely concerning. They're a team that I think is going to struggle to beat a lot of the better teams in this group, and I don't even think Beyond is one of the better teams in this group. Croc's build, already went over it, absolutely abysmal. He didn't play much better. He had no jungle control in a matchup that he should have full jungle control in. I always talk about this with Sejuani because it feels like it's always applicable, but Sej is not a pick that is supposed to dominate the early to mid game, but almost every single time a Sej wins, she is able to gain that control because the enemy jungler is simply just too scared to engage on the Sej because of the rotations that can happen and the prolonged nature of every Sej fight, which I understand, but you've got Nazir, you've got a Jax, you have things you can duel with here. You have to simply play this more aggressive, and you have to build more aggressive. So Croc is going to get my dud of the game here. Robo and Tinones certainly didn't play any better here. The Jax in the top lane was consistently getting dove by the Sejuani over and over again. He was pushing far beyond what it was acceptable of him, and was getting punished for it a lot. Tinones just got beat by Minji. That was not close at all. Obviously, picking mid on blue side without counterpick can sometimes be a problem, but why the Azir? I get it. He's safe, and he's gonna offer a bit of damage in the late game, but as I talked about in my meta report, his damage has really fallen off a considerable amount after the nerfs. I really don't think he's all that viable in the mid lane right now, at least as a hyper carry, which you really do kind of need him to be on this team for the team fights, because the Jax isn't going to be that. Hecarim can be that, but he certainly didn't build like that. and Seraphine's just not that kind of champion. So you're really needing that DPS from Azir, and he's just never going to be able to offer that in the same way that you need it from him. I already talked about Branson Seos having a really good early game and not being able to transition it into anything. That's honestly, I'm not putting this on them at all. The map was basically disintegrated by the time they got to the point where they could do anything, and the game was over. So it's really hard for me to blame a lot of the Loud bot lane. It's really easy for me to blame the top 3 players on Loud. What do they need to do to be better in the next time? Well, Red side I think is going to help out for them a lot. They got a lot of really terrible lane matchups. Please no more Azir. Don't pick the Jax if you're not going to win on it against Fiora. You knew it was coming in. Overall, I just don't like any of these picks overall for Loud, and I definitely think they need a big redraft. I like Hecarim, I like Seraphine, I like Nautilus, but Hecarim built horribly, and by the time Seraphine Nautilus was going to get online, the game was entirely over, so you really never reaped the rewards from it, especially on your carry player. I just don't like Brance on the Seraphine when there are so many other options in the meta right now. So things that Loud can work and improve on, definitely. For Beyond, just keep going like this. You played to your strengths. You played to your jungle mid, and that is what is going to get you as far as you can get in this tournament. I don't know where that is yet, but this was a really satisfying win, and there's really a high potential that they could be a lot better than the 5th team in this group that I had them ranked in my power rankings. Overall, good game, great win for Beyond, and I hope that they can keep this up throughout the rest of the play-ins. Jumping into game number 4 here, and we had our first team play their second game of the day here in game number 4, as we had EU's Mad Lions taking on the winner of the TCL in the Istanbul Wildcats, and I really thought this game was gonna be close. I actually didn't think these teams were all that far apart in terms of talent. I've been talking about this. I think the Istanbul Wildcats are getting relatively slept on in terms of the grand scheme of things. I think Starscreen was getting slept on as a weak side top laner. I really liked Holy Phoenix and Farfetch and how they played in playoffs. And Saren really impressed me in the mid lane. Unfortunately, none of that really came to fruition in this game. While they were relatively competitive, Mad Lions was pretty clearly the better team throughout, mostly because what an unbelievable game from their bot lane. Talked about this in game number 1 here. I was a little bit worried for Unforgiven, mostly because obviously he was sick with COVID. He was playing in an isolated room, and he really looked it in game number 1. He didn't look all that healthy. He didn't look all that confident, and he really didn't play all that well, but boy, did he bounce back in game number 2 here, because he gets the Kai'Sa in game number 2, a pick that obviously he's significantly more comfortable on than the Seraphine, which is weird considering his playstyle, but I guess they're both kind of there. And boy, does he pop off. 14-1-1, obviously a great game. You don't need me to tell you that. But it pops off more on the film than it even does on the scoreline. He was really making plays in this game, showing why the Kai'Sa buffs really do matter. I was very low on this champion generally going into this event, because I really didn't think the changes impacted the champion enough for her to be able to keep up with the likes of Aphelios, Misfortune, Caitlyn, the other big champions in the meta. Unfortunately, I failed to account for the fact that Kai'Sa is just simply more proactive, and by that account, more fun than a lot of the other champions, and so a lot of players at this tournament are going to have more experience on her, and man, did Unforgiven look really freaking good on this Kai'Sa. If he can play like this in every game, very similar to what I said for Fnatic, this Mad Lions team has the potential to be even better than what I projected of them. I had them as the worst major region team at this tournament. That's worse than EG. That's worse than Fnatic, you know, blah, 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 blah. All the other teams that are in play-ins, blah, blah, blah. But maybe they're better than that, right? Like, a lot of my optimism for this team in the regular season was kind of hinging on the idea of Elyoya and Niski being that duo that they were throughout the regular season, where Elyoya could really dominate in the early game matchup, and Niski was able to shove and roam and be entirely proactive the rest of the game. And I kind of forgot how good Unforgiven was, who I think you can make a real case is probably the most talented player on this team. I mean, Kaiser's also really great, but Elyoya, Niski, Armut, all good players. Unforgiven is mechanically unbelievable, and he really showed it on the Kai'Sa. If he can play like this, they're going to be in a really good spot. Did I mention he was player of the game? He was awesome. Gave a lot of credit to Kaiser as well on the Alistar. This is a lane I understand significantly more than the Kai'Sa and Mumu we saw in the last game. Alistar just makes a ton of sense as a Kai'Sa support, because what does Kai'Sa need? She needs time, especially in the early game. She needs setup. While a Mumu can offer that, yes, he can't do it nearly as consistently, and it doesn't really play to a Mumu's strengths to do that nearly as much, where Alistar is great just being that peel and being that lockdown. And Kaiser played that really well. This is obviously the style that Kaiser really made a name for himself on in the past few years. The Enchanter meta really didn't bring out the best in him, even though I thought he was still pretty freaking good over the course of the year. The Alistair really is right up his alley, and he showed it in this game. Another good one from him. And then I'm talking like Niski didn't also play super well. Niski no Yoya definitely had an impact on the game. Niski Silas has also been one of his best picks over the course of the year. I would say Talia and Silas have certainly been those two in my eyes. And then Elyoya goes to the Trundle. This is a pick I expected to have significantly more priority throughout the tournament. We've seen other junglers kind of rise above it, the Graves, the Hecarim. I thought Trundle was still going to be a pretty good pick into a lot of those things because of the early game power that he can offer. He's really good into a Jarvan matchup like this, but he's also really good into Hecarim because Hecarim hates that movement speed slow and the block that could potentially happen from the pillar. And so overall, I would expect Trundle priority to rise, and I thought Elyoya played it pretty well in this game. Overall, not perfect, certainly not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Arma definitely had a more regular season-oriented game here. He was really good in game 1, he was just fine. Maybe it's sometimes bad here in game number 2 on the Aatrox, but definitely salvageable, especially when your bot side is playing like this. I'm definitely a little bit worried about the trend that this team has gone on as well, where really good early games, really good late games, not so good mid games. Definitely need to clean that up. For the Wildcats, though, their first game at Worlds here, and I just wish it was a little bit more complete. I think that there were moments in this game that looked really good. Saren pulls out the Azir, something he played a ton of in the regular season. Really am not a fan of the Azir pick, like I said, but it can still technically work, especially more so, in my opinion, with a Misfortune on the team, who can carry the load for a big portion of the damage. Azir can be that more secondary carry and can help out from a long range, whereas MF is more of that burst, damage that's going to come out and really blow people up quickly, especially with the Leona engages. I like the idea a bit more. And I thought Saren's positioning towards the back half of the game was fine, but overall, there's only so much that you can do. The Renekton certainly fell off, wasn't able to generate the same kind of lead. He's going to need to be able to do the things that Aatrox is able to do. The Leona pick, I just don't think is nearly as good as something like the Nautilus in the meta right now. We're seeing people go to the Leona over the Nautilus. I just don't understand that, and I really don't expect that prio to continue. She really hasn't been nearly as effective, in my opinion, in these first few games. And my thoughts on Jarvan really haven't changed at all from the meta report. I put him in there as a tier 2 pick. I talked about this a lot in the LEC playoffs because of Malrang, but Jarvan is the same champion he's been for a while. His engages are incredibly consistent, but if he's not ahead and he's not able to generate that gold lead, he can be very squishy and very difficult to get anything else off with in a team fight, and that's kind of what Ferret turned into towards the back half here. Obviously, I'm hoping for more from the Wildcats because I really do believe that they can maybe be a team that can upset their way into top 4, but not the best look here in game number 1. They couldn't even beat a Mad Lions team that at certain points definitely didn't look like they had full control of the game. So overall, good things from Mad, good things from the Wildcats, but just need more of it. I need them to start winning games. Obviously, the Saigon Buffalo game is going to be absolutely huge for their chances. If they can't win that, they're probably not making any best of 5s, but they do need to start picking up the pace quickly. There's only one single round robin in the best of 1s here, and you've got to make every game count. Unfortunately, they start off with an 0-1. I didn't even mention Starscreen's my dud of the game here on the Renekton. Not an awful game, but like I said, just got completely outscaled by Armut, even though he played relatively okay in the early game, and that Renekton had literally negative impact. I think you could have given this to Farfetch as well in the support position, but for me, those were the two I was definitely considering. Overall, for Mad Lions, though, Unforgiven played phenomenal. If him, Kaiser, Niski can really keep this up, if you can play more consistently through the bot lane, that was one of the big problems a lot of people had with this team in the playoffs, is it felt like Unforgiven could never be the hyper carry. Well, he really showed that he could in this game. I'm not super sold that that's going to be their path to success against some of the better teams in the group, but starting out 2-0 has got to leave a good taste in Mad Lions fans' mouths. Moving on to our 5th game here of the day, and we get to jump in to another really fun matchup, and one that I was really looking forward to, as I was really hoping we were going to see potentially an upset here, but we don't quite get it. We do get a very fun game between the winners of the LCO, Chiefs, and the Fnatic team that we saw earlier dominate Evil Geniuses. And Fnatic with another incredibly solid performance here, as they're able to cap off their 2-0 day 1, even with a substitute in the support position. And boy, howdy, does it look good. Big congratulations to this Fnatic team, because not only did they play well, they drafted well, they look good overall, and it just checks all the boxes. It checks all the worries for Fnatic. This is the easier of the two groups, and in my opinion, they took on the two hardest teams to play against today, and they beat them both incredibly cleanly. This is a team that could very, very easily go undefeated in this group now. I really don't think there are a lot of challenges standing in their way. DFM, Beyond, Loud, I certainly don't think pose the same kind of threat that a team like EG does, certainly, but also even a team like Chiefs, who I do think looked very scary going into this tournament. But what did Fnatic do to get here, and was it actually a good-looking win, or is it just another W, even though they didn't play perfectly like maybe the Mad Lions 2-0s were? Well, overall, I have to say, my opinion on Fnatic is that they look phenomenal. They truly do look like a team that is ready for Worlds group stage, and I think they are going to prove that throughout the rest of this group, if you haven't already caught my opinion. This bottom lane, oh my lord, are they good. I'm not going to say that Rux is better than Hylissang, but boy, did he do a phenomenal job of filling in for Hilly at this tournament while he was out. Upset comes in, jet-lagged, basically gets to the studio in time to play their first match against EG, absolutely stomps all over a Caitlyn Lux, and then gets in here to game 2 and gets a freaking pentakill for his troubles. He's going to get my player of the game here in game number 2 for Fnatic, game number 5 overall on the day. Certainly deserving on the Kalista, a pick that, yes, I know, Kalista was nerfed. I talked about this in my meta report. She's still really good at what she does. The base health doesn't matter all that much, especially when you're going to be trading a lot around level 3, level 4, and your support's really going to matter a lot in that circumstance. You're going to be able to generate leads if you are the better player, and man, we're Upset and Rux, the better players in this bottom lane. No offense to Raze and Aladoric, both players who I've given a ton of praise on this channel over the course not only of the last few weeks, but in Raze's case, over the course of the last year or so. But Upset made him look absolutely incompetent in that bottom lane. He was so phenomenal. Rux's engages on the Nautilus were completely on point, and this bot lane continued again to show that they're probably the scariest in Group A without a question. And I don't really have a lot of question marks at this point. This is Upset's first World Championship. A lot of people forget that because he was supposed to be on this team last year, but couldn't play at it because obviously of personal reasons and everything. But at the end of the day, this is Upset's first chance on the world stage, on an international stage, not even MSI or anything like that. This is his first international series, and he looks phenomenal. He absolutely crushed the first 2 games. If he can keep that up, he is going to be a menace for the next, I don't know, a month or so to go, and really could be taking Fnatic a lot farther than people expect. Obviously, I don't want to talk too much about Rux because I'm not even sure if he's going to play anymore after today, but boy, was his day 1 perfect. And if he is able to play some more games, I'm going to be incredibly excited. The way he is playing at this tournament has genuinely probably earned him a spot in the LEC next year, and that is amazing for somebody who's been in the scene for as long as Rux, who's been around the world, around the world essentially. Not only has he been in EU Masters for what feels like ever, he even spent his split in the CBLOL in Brazil with Red Cannons, playing with BRTT, because obviously, he's Portuguese, he already knew the language, going into it was pretty easy, and he looks good there too. I just hope that maybe this performance can show that it is maybe worth giving him a shot at the LEC level if you're gonna give some of the players that got it this year. I do think he's an upgrade to a lot of the supports in the LEC, especially with how he played here, but overall, the rest of the team also looked really good. Razork here on the counter pick Lee Sin, do like it. Lee Sin's pretty good right now. I'm probably higher on Lee Sin than a lot of other people are. I definitely think he's going to be meta more than people expect. The Victor, probably the best control mage in the meta right now. And then they did it! Hallelujah! The Maokai came out, and I was so excited. I talked about this so much in my meta report. It really feels like he's the strongest top laner in the game right now, and not a lot of people are really giving him a shot. Wunder wasn't really able to showcase his full potential in this game, but the Maokai is incredibly oppressive to play into in lane, and then he just gets worse over time. The amount that champion can do in the mid to late game, especially if you go hyper late, we're talking like 35, 40 minutes, Maokai is going to be legitimately unkillable, and with any AP items on that champion at all, those E's on that with CDR, you're going to be slowed permanently, you're going to be taking a billion damage. He's very scary to play into right now, and I'm really glad to see him here, even if Wunder wasn't able to show him off in the way that I maybe wanted. Overall, good game from Fnatic, not so great game from Chiefs. Definitely not what I wanted to see from the undefeated Titans of the LCO. Was certainly looking for them to at least put up a little bit of a better fight, but again, it is against a Fnatic team that really does feel like they're clicking on all cylinders. I didn't even mention, Humanoid looked phenomenal in this game. He played great in game 1. He gets the victor back again in game number 2. And boy, did he obliterate Tally. Like, this was a mid-gap. I talked about the bot gap a lot. This was a mid-canyon here for Fnatic, as Humanoid played phenomenal again on this victor pick that I expect to either be banned or constantly picked for this Fnatic team, because it has clearly been Humanoid's best pick, not only so far at Worlds here, but if you can go back to the playoffs, they really started to unlock their playoff run when they stopped putting Humanoid on these more shove and roam type mids that are kind of populating the meta, stopped being on the Talia, stopped being on the Sylas, and put him back on something that he's much more comfortable on, like the Victor, where he could really just take over his laning phase again, and he's really reinvigorated himself over the past few weeks, and I'm really hoping he can keep that up. Unfortunately, that came at the expense of Tally in this game, who was completely gapped, and Tally's gonna get my dud of the game here. Definitely a little bit of a worry with Tally. He's someone who's never really been able to show up on the international stage from somebody who's spent time in North America as well. Was really hoping he was going to be able to turn around his fate because he played so well in OS over the course of this year, but wasn't really able to do that. Not a great Swain game. Swain was my pick for highest win rate, champion with at least 5 games played or whatever, because I truly did think he was going to be a pretty good pick, but it already looks like that's not in a good spot unless he wins the rest of the 4. And unfortunately, that is thanks to Tally. And really, the thing with Swain and why I thought he would be a good pick is overall, he can play really passive in the early game, but his late game prowess is going to be good as long as the rest of the team is around him. Unfortunately, you don't really have a great matchup to move to if you're the Graves in this case. Of course, Graves into Lee Sin, not a particular matchup that you want to fight early game. You need to hit that scale button, you need to power farm, you need to get to that late game where you can actually start out damaging him. But Swain needs help. The bot lane's gonna need help. Tristana and Braum really can't do much into Kalista Nautilus, and while top lane will probably be fine because Maokai can't really kill and Gwen's really good into tanks, it's not like that's gonna be a huge winning matchup for you. There's really not a lot of options for Arthur to be able to get assistance here. Tally losing really made that even worse. His Humanoid was really everywhere on the map, and the mid-canyon made it very difficult for Arthur to make any sort of plays in this game at all. So those two definitely not good. Raze and Aladoric, I already talked about getting bot gapped pretty heavily, upset with the pentakill this game. Not all of it were Raze and Aladoric's fault, but Raze didn't play well at all in this one. He definitely needs to step up if this team wants to be anything more than a mid-tier team, and then Tapoon in the top lane didn't really matter, if I'm being all that honest. And so, overall, definitely some things I need to see out of Chiefs before I reconfirm that they're the 3rd best team in this group, in my opinion. I need to see Tally not play like this, because this was someone who could regularly get abused if he plays like this every game. Raze is in a similar spot. I really do believe Aladoric is fine, and maybe get him off the Braum. I do like the Braum, but maybe something a little bit more aggressive, especially into Kalista, something that can punish a little bit harder than the Braum. And then the Tristana pick clearly didn't work out. Maybe go to something a little bit more late game focused. That's what Raze did really well on over the course of the OS playoffs. I'm a little bit more comfortable with Tapoon and Arthur because I really do think that they're pretty stable, and with better teammates around them, they're probably going to look better, but overall, Chiefs just need to step it up. This level of quality is not going to cut it for them to make the best of 5s, especially with Beyond playing a little bit above expectations. So, where are these two teams at? Well, Chiefs I'm a little bit lower on. Obviously, not a great game. Will probably make top 4 as long as they keep their pace, but definitely are going to need to prove it against teams like DFM, Beyond, and Loud. Fnatic look like they're a lock for first place at this point. It doesn't look like it's all that contested. In my opinion, these were probably the 2 most tough games they had going into the tournament, and they knocked them out of the park. The rest of the 3 should be relatively simple from this point onward. And so, really not worried about Fnatic at all. If they can keep this up, I'm more thinking about can they even get out of their main stage group when we get to that point. Jumping into game number 6 now. We're nearing the back half of the games in day number 1 here, and we had another fun one. This time, really 2 minor region teams. There's really no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The PCS obviously maybe didn't qualify. They're kind of like a in-the-middle team, but 2 teams with only 1 rep at Worlds this year. We had the winners of the LJL versus the winners of the CBLOL. We had Detonation FocusMe versus Loud, and to many people's surprise, me included, Loud came out and obliterated this game. It was not close, the shortest game of the day by far, only going 23 minutes. An absolute steamroll from a Loud team that kind of got steamrolled earlier today. Certainly not what I was expecting after they couldn't even hold a candle to Beyond. I certainly didn't think they were going to be on the level of a team that I thought was better than Beyond in DFM, but maybe the scales are shifting just a tad bit. Maybe DFM is just not the kind of team that they looked like in playoffs. But let's talk about Loud first and what they did well in this game. Overall, I think this is more of a team effort than a lot of the other games that we talked about today, where I think some of the others were really carried by specific members of their team. It was Upset and Rux being amazing in the bottom lane. Obviously, Humanoid was great too. Even in the Beyond game, Minji and Husha were great there in the mid-jungle duo, but this really didn't feel like the same set of circumstances for Loud, where it felt like the entire team really stepped up and just kind of won, like, across the board. Robo dominated Evie in the top lane. We'll get to that. Croc had full jungle pressure, a great bounce back after a horrible Hecarim game earlier in the day. Tinones pulls out the Zoe, a pick I really didn't expect to see a ton of at the World Championships this year, but certainly looked good on it and was doing a ton of damage towards the back half of this game. And then Branson Seos were great on that MF and Mumu duo that I've been hyping up over the course of the tournament, but honestly, it was really hard to pick a player of the game because it really felt like everybody was doing their jobs. Really, the final two it came down to specifically for me were a Mumu for those engages and Zoe for that damage in the back half. Obviously, really turning it up towards the end of the game. I think you could realistically give it to both Seos and Tinones, but for me, it's going to go to Seos on that Amumu. Great game from him overall on the Amumu, and I honestly am surprisingly really starting to favor this pick overall. Certainly don't think it's a general pick, but MF Amumu just makes that combo and both of those champions so much better. It's really, really difficult for me to imagine picking one without the other. If you have the MF, I just want the Amumu. If you have the Amumu, I just want the MF, and I think they could really make the most dangerous bot lane duo in the tournament right now. I know everyone's scared of Caitlyn Lux, but I think MF and Mumu could be even more deadly because they do have that early game pressure, plus they have the ability to take over team fights in the late game if you get the right engage off, and overall, I think that's what we saw here. Both Branson and Seos played really well in the early game. We're able to get super far ahead of Utapon and Harp, just generally speaking on the Aphelios Alistar, a lane that definitely needs a lot more time to scale. And while they weren't bad in the early game, Branson and Seos just were able to generate such a strong lead and were able to push them out so much that they were able to be significantly more impactful in a lot of these early dragon fights that Loud was able to take. They started stacking early, and they were really effective doing so. Croc really put a lot of emphasis into getting that overall, and it definitely worked out. Tinones also got a pretty big lead in the mid lane, just generally on the Zoe into the Taliyah. You can do a lot of damage on the Zoe, but I really didn't expect the shove battle to be in favor of Tinones in this matchup. I thought the Taliyah would generally be able to make a lot more plays across the map, but Tinones certainly proved me wrong. A really good game from him, and then I talked about this, but Robo really dominated that top lane matchup. The Sedge was certainly not the tank I expected to see the most of at Worlds today, but at the end of the day, I still thought it was going to be a tank meta, so I'm not super surprised Sedge is kind of back here, but really, really strong laning phase, especially if you weren't able to punish it early, because she's just going to get on a roll. She's going to be able to slow you down, really cause you to have a lot of problems in that top lane being able to get out, especially if someone like Viego is going to be coming top relatively regularly, and that's kind of what happened for Loud in this game. Robo and Croc really made a strong duo and were able to take advantage of Evie's mispositioning mistakes on the Aatrox, to the point where, obviously, Aatrox loves to create that, what I call the secondary line in teamfights. If he tried doing that in this game, it was absolutely irrelevant. He died so quickly that he really wasn't even able to frontline for this team at all. He just died basically instantly. He was paper, and so great job from Robo and Croc to be able to shut down that lane. Tinones winning in the mid, Branson Seos winning in their lanes. Honestly, just a great game overall from a Loud team that I really wanted to see it from. But for DFM, definitely disappointed. Not what I wanted to see start their tournament off at all. This is a team that finished first in their play-in group last year. I know it's a different team, and I said that in my preview. I said this is not the DFM from last year. Don't expect this team to be nearly as good, because in my opinion, they're just not. But, I mean, come on, I didn't expect them to be this overall. Evie, a player who was an absolute superstar for this team last year, was awful in this game, continuously getting caught out in the top lane, really just walking into situations that he had absolutely no business being in. It looked like he was horrible on the Aatrox, a pick that he was honestly really good on last year, so I can't imagine something incredible happened in between. They go to the Poppy in the jungle. I'm very critical of this. The Poppy nerfs, in my opinion, actually hit the champion pretty hard. I don't know if she's actually all that playable right now. I know DFM found a lot of success on her throughout the regular season and the playoffs, but you gotta adapt to the new meta, and Poppy just is not in meta right now, and Steel definitely felt that in the early game. A lot of invades from Loud to really make Steel's life a living hell. And then the rest of the players, Yaharong, Utapon, and Harp, honestly just got outplayed in their own individual laning phases. Really not awful games, but certainly not something to write home about. You really, really, really needed to see better from DFM. Now, a lot of people were criticizing EG's draft earlier in the day, with the Renekton, obviously with the Caitlyn Lux, really early game focused. I tend to defend comps like that a little bit more because of how early game focused I think the general game has become recently with snowballing and all that, becoming really, really heavily favored over scaling. And DFM took the opposite approach, really heavy scaling on this. Aatrox, Aphelios, Talia, not things that are really going to be able to dominate in laning phase, and they lost every lane and just kind of lost the game. And so overall, this is too far in the other direction. Not a good one. Evie is my dud of the game. I don't know if I already said that, but it's very, very clear to me. Just not what I wanted to see out of DFM. Definitely going to need to see an improvement out of them if they want to make it further in this tournament. So what does it mean for the two teams? Well, DFM's kind of now sitting in a spot where they really have to start beating teams that I don't know if they can consistently beat. They have to beat Beyond now. They really have to beat Chiefs in order to make a best of 5 at this tournament. And that's not really the situation you wanted to be in, coming off from a main stage group last year at the tournament. And so you were really hoping for more for them. For Loud, this is about as perfect as it gets. This is a team that I wasn't really expecting to consistently be able to take games off of anybody in this tournament. Losing earlier to Beyond kind of confirmed that for me, but this is a great turnaround against Beyond, or against DFM, I should say, and if they can continue this pace, they might even be able to put up a fight against a team like Chiefs, which would be great for their chances of being able to play a best of 5, and I'm pretty sure everybody would love that. The CB LoL is an absolutely massive market for League, and for their teams to do well, I think it does well for the general ecosystem of the sport, and so I'm cheering on Loud, and I imagine a lot of the rest of the world is as well. Jumping into our 7th game here of day 1 action, a great day 1 here, as we got another really fun game here between two teams that were definitely willing to bring it and bring the heat early. What can you expect else, though, from the VCS, the region we've been missing on the international stage for quite a long time? We saw their number 2 seed, Saigon Buffalo, take on the Istanbul Wildcats from the TCL in this game, and boy, did they look awesome as the Buffalo are able to pick up their first win of the tournament in their first game. And the VCS is back, baby. No one is more excited about this than I am. They are so fun to watch regularly. I know I only talk about the 4 major regions on this channel, but if there is a 5th region that I try to watch regularly, it is absolutely the VCS, because I think you can make a real argument. It is the most fun league to watch in the entire world, and it's not even really all that close. Constant action, constant crazy picks, constant innovation that ends up getting spread to the rest of the game. They're not afraid to take stuff from solo queue that they know has worked for them and translate that into a pro environment where they can try to master it and bring it to a more coordinated effort. And lo and behold, game 1, we get that, and we couldn't have got it in a better circumstance. We get the Zac mid in game number 1. I think this has only been played once before internationally. I could be wrong, but I heard a lot of the casters saying on the desk that this was only the 2nd time that this pick has ever been played professionally in this position, and I would agree with that. I've never seen it. I don't remember seeing it. Maybe I do. Maybe I have seen it, and I just don't remember, but it's certainly not something that is regular. It is probably relatively regular for those who are stuck in, like, Diamond Masters solo queue right now, because Zac mid is a really good thing to spam if you just want to take over the mid game, because there is so much pressure that you can apply with Zac in a lot of other positions, and even in the mid lane if you have good gank support. But I never thought I would see it on the competitive stage. I certainly did not expect to see it in play-ins, and Saigon Buffalo pulls it out, and they look phenomenal on the champion. It is actually great here. Good job, Froggy. You gotta have flexibility at a tournament like Worlds, where a lot of things are going to be played around the meta, and sometimes breaking that meta is your best chance at being able to upset teams that are better than you. Saigon Buffalo not playing a team that's better than them here on day 1, but certainly going to have a challenge ahead of them in Group B. These are the kinds of things that I think can genuinely beat some of the better teams in Group B. I'm not going to say they'll ever be favorites against the likes of RNG and DRX, but if they were, it's because they're going to pull out something crazy like Zac mid, and DRX and RNG are going to have absolutely no idea how to play into it. A great game from him. Very nearly gave him my player of the game just for the innovation. He did play well, and the Zac certainly came into effect in a lot of the areas that they decided to play around in this game, but I would be remiss to not give player of the game to Shogun here in the bot lane. I was incredibly, and I mean incredibly high on Shogun going into this tournament. If you watched my Group B overview and analysis predictions video that I put out before this tournament, you'll know that I think Shogun is the kind of player who could dominate in a region like the LCS or the LEC. I think he is that mechanically talented overall as a player, and boy did he show it in this game number 1. I know it's the Istanbul Wildcats. I know Holy Phoenix played incredibly passive, and Farfetch'd went 7,000 acres into every single fight, but I don't know if there was a single misfortune today, and there were a lot of misfortunes that played better than Shogun. And I mean that. I don't think there were any misfortunes. Yes, a lot of them were able to play with that Amumu, able to line up the bullet time, and were able to do a lot of damage in the team fights because of that. There was no single misfortune that positioned better. There was no single misfortune that was doing significantly more damage without the ultimate. Shogun was just perfect in this game. You really can't convince me otherwise. And if he can play like this team is going to be incredibly scary to deal with. If you've got a crazy pick like the Zac in the mid lane, you've got a pick like the Misfortune in the bot lane that, when played as well as this, is very unstoppable, even with the Leona. Let's say you have an Amumu on that side. I mean, that is genuinely unbeatable in my opinion. And then the Hecarim, the Gwen, Hazmed played really well in the top lane, was able to completely duke on Starscream, who's been a very good weak side top throughout the entire year in the TCL. If I do have one complaint, it is Beanjay in the jungle. While he did play relatively okay on the Hecarim, stop building tank on Hecarim. You're just wasting the champion overall, but it's fine. It's really hard for me to complain because the Buffalo were so good in this game, and I really just hope that they can keep it up. As for the Wildcats, frustrating. That's the word I'm going to use because they're so close. They have good players. Holy Phoenix played okay in this game, and honestly, he was really in a position to be able to carry some of these late game team fights, but he played so safe, and the opposite was the case of his support. It really felt like they weren't on the same page throughout the majority of this game. Farfetch would go in, and he would be so deep, he'd be able to knock up 3 people, but no one would be able to follow up, and he would just simply get there and die, and then Holy Phoenix is going to have to try and make something out of this in a team fight. Yes, he could have W'd and went and ulted in and tried to pick up some kills. I certainly wish he played more aggressive because I think some of the passiveness, I almost said the passivity, the passiveness that Holy Phoenix showed was a big reason they were in that bad spot in the first place, but you gotta meet somewhere in the middle. You can't be Farfetch levels of aggressive. You can't be Holy Phoenix levels of passive. You gotta be somewhere in the middle where you can fight as a team, as a whole, because Starscream was relatively okay as that Sejuani in the late game. Yes, he wasn't super tanky, but the ult was still always going to be good. Trundle was actually really good into this comp. He could steal the Zac or the Leona's stats, which was always going to be great. You have a ton of great ultimates to steal on the side of Istanbul for Silas. Like, you theoretically could be in a spot to be able to fight here, but you were never in a coordinated spot. The team looked very disjointed, and that's incredibly concerning because you can't be that way at Worlds. You've had an entire year to be able to get this team together. If you're not good enough yet with that synergy, it's just not going to happen. And an 0-2 start for Istanbul is really disastrous for them. Obviously, they can still bounce back. They played 2 really good teams here, Matt and Saigon Buffalo. You still have, potentially a game against Isurus that you can win. And, you've got the 2 best teams in the group outside of that. But, technically it's not over. But I do think their chances at making a best of 5 probably aren't the best. Now, they're going to have to cause a massive upset against one of the better teams in the group, and I just don't think it's all that likely. I'm not going to say that they're completely out of it, but especially if Holy Phoenix and Farfetch play like this, I just don't see it on the cards. They're going to have a tough time against Isurus. They're not even going to be in the same league as DRX, and so very, very difficult for me to even imagine that right now. But overall, great game from Saigon Buffalo overall. If they play like this throughout the rest of this tournament, if Froggy's pulling out some insane shit in the mid lane, if Shogun and Taki are playing unbelievable in the bot lane, if Hazmed and Beanjay and everybody can really step up on this team, they could be a serious threat. I cannot wait for Saigon versus Matt. I think that's going to be an absolute banger of a game, and I'm really, really excited to see what this team can do for the rest of group stage, because theoretically, we could be seeing this team in a pretty good spot to be playing a best of 5 to get out of play-ins and into main stage. That's going to bring us to the 8th and final game of the day, and it was the one people were the most excited about. A lot of us had to wait for it quite a long time. Even me in America, I live on the East Coast. This game didn't even kick off for me until midnight. I can't even imagine how it was for people around the world, but we finally got to see it. We got to see an LPL LCK clash at an international tournament, and the winner of it was the LCK, as they are able to manage the upset win. DRX takes down RNG in game 1 of both of their world championships. A phenomenal win for DRX, and golly, it was just fun to watch. Game of the day, by far. Obviously, if you're only going to watch one, this is it, without a doubt. An incredibly close game between 2 very, very fun teams to watch. DRX obviously not coming into this tournament with the most momentum, but RNG could be on a similar slope, both having to qualify after barely getting into the spot needing to qualify. RNG losing out to EDG twice, once in playoffs, once in the regional finals, finally taking a series off of LNG. And then, of course, for DRX, they were the 6th seed going into the regional finals because they weren't even 500 in the regular season of the summer split. They're able to take down KT Rolster, they're able to take down Live Sandbox, and they make their way to the World Championships with the jungle substitution, but who needs them? The meta's back in favor of Pyosik. I've kind of been talking about this, but power farming junglers, that's what Pyosik became a superstar on in 2021 over the course of the last year, when he was dragging this DRX team across the finish line in a phenomenal spring split. We're kind of back in meta for that. You want the Graves, you want the Hecarim, you want the Maokai? That's right up Pyosik's alley. He comes back in for the World Championships here. They draft the Maokai as the flex pick, move it into the jungle. They're able to draft a high damage comp around him. Obviously, the Aatrox is good, but Akali, Tristana, incredibly high burst damage. If you're able to get kills early in a fight, you're very likely going to be able to turn that into your favor with resets. And just with pure aggression, you add a Rel on top of that. That is a go all the way in button, even more so than something like a Mumu, because you really don't have secondary options. She goes in, does her thing, and hopefully you get the kills in time. And it worked. It actually worked for DRX. You've got to be excited about that for this team. And one thing I really do try to avoid on this channel, generally speaking, is tooting my own horn or being like, I told you so. I really don't like when channels do that too much, and I'm not doing that with DRX because I certainly didn't expect them to be able to beat RNG, and if they were, it wasn't going to be like this. But one thing I do have to toot my own horn about and kind of raise the flag on is Zika. I mean, come on. Has there been any analyst, I dare you to try to find an analyst that is as high on him as I am, and he is coming up clutch in these games. He was amazing for them in the regular season, even through the periods where Pyosik and Beryl were completely running it down for this DRX team. They were almost always in games because of him in the mid lane, and he really came through. He's going to get my player of the game on the Akali. Some of these late game team fights, I know his score doesn't look as good as Deft's, and Deft we'll certainly get to. He had a phenomenal game as well, but this is really the guy for this team. They play around him in the mid lane. They certainly want to get him ahead, and he rewards them. This Akali play was phenomenal. The only Akali that we saw all day. I expect to see more of this champion, especially if we're going to get more LeBlanc. I think Akali is just simply better LeBlanc right now, and so I would expect that pick to come out. But that team fight that basically saved them the game, where he's able to clean up kills in the back half on Wei and then eventually on Breathe, that saved the game, period. End of story. RNG was in a really good spot. If they're able to kill Zika there, they're not able to do it. He's able to pick up some kills in the back half, and they're able to maintain, hold on, really set themselves up in a much better spot. Obviously, this game was not easy. DRX was actually in a spot to be able to push a lot closer to the Baron, but it ends up getting stolen, not by Wei, but by Xiaohu on this LeBlanc, being able to get in. I don't even know what ends up happening. I think Pyosik just smites early, and Xiaohu's just able to get it. The Baron dies at like 1100 health, and so it's really difficult to tell what exactly was able to claim it, but Xiaohu's able to pick that up and steal it. RNG then tries to go for the Dragon Soul here. Both teams on 3 dragons. It's Hextech Soul. They're going to fight around it. Pyosik then steals it from RNG. They're able to clean up the fight. Deft does a great job of being able to do a ton of damage on the backline. Zika's obviously doing a ton, and this DRX team is actually able to dethrone RNG, who a lot of people just had self-anointed as the kings of play-ins, me included. I didn't think this team was going to be touched. If any team was going to beat them, though, it was going to be DRX, and they really did show up today. Big credit to Zika. Huge credit to Deft in the bot lane. I've been talking a lot this year about how Deft has been hyper-consistent, but never great, and I do stand by that opinion for the regular season. He was great in this game. This is the kind of performance you need out of Deft at the World Championships, and this is what I want to see. I want to see a player who, it might be his last hurrah, it really might be his last chance to win a world title, playing his absolute heart out and playing to win, not playing to go even like Deft did for a lot of the regular season. And man, did he do well here. He obliterated Gala in lane. We will get to that, but great game from Deft and a great game from Pyosik. I love this. Pyosik's one of my favorite players in the world. I'm not shy about talking about that on the channel, and I was really frustrated with him throughout the season because it really just didn't feel like it was his meta, and he couldn't really adapt. He has his playstyle, and when it's not working, it's not working. It's like really not working, but Maokai, Graves, Hecarim, these are the things I want to see Pyosik on, and he really made use of that. The flex Maokai pick into the jungle, the first time we've seen that here. This was oppressive as hell to play into. Those slows, the CDR build on Maokai makes him unbelievably difficult to actively deal with in the jungle because he's got goons in literally every bush. You are taking 50% of your health before you get to a single team fight, and you're always on vision, and you're always slowed. He's just such a nightmare. Now that the ult has a speed up, and he gains movement speed from it, I mean, holy crap, is he actually phenomenal right now, and he really showed that. Was really able to take over the whole map, gave Vi major, major troubles. Obviously, a lot of people have problems with RNG's draft. I'll get to that in a bit, but DRX's, I have basically none. This is exactly the kind of comp they needed to pull out here against a team like RNG, and they executed on it perfectly. Not to discredit Beryl and Kingen, but it really was those three that were carrying DRX and made this game so fun to watch. For RNG, I hate this draft. I'm not the only one. Why are you picking LeBlanc? Why are you picking Vi? Why? Why would you pick Neela? I just don't get any of this. Vi is not really going to help you. Vi's great for point and click, but who are you ulting? Actively, who are you ulting? The Akali? Sorry, she's invisible. You can't point and click on her. The Tristana? She's just going to jump away. None of it actually matters. Or the Maokai, the Aatrox, the Rel are just going to disengage. What does Vi do in this game? Absolutely nothing. Hate the pick. I already talked about why I don't like LeBlanc. I just don't think her damage is high enough. Her safety is good, and obviously Xiaohu's very good at the champion, but I would have liked other picks in this spot instead. And then the cream of the crop, Neela here, did literally nothing this game. I mean, literally negative nothing this game. Absolutely disgraceful for Gala to bring this out at Worlds. First time Neela, obviously, you know, I gotta give some of the blame to Gala. He played this game pretty horribly. This kind of goes along with what I've been saying for the past few weeks, which is, look at Gala in the playoffs and in the regional finals. This is not your king, I promise. Like, obviously, we're hoping that Gala can get it back together for Worlds, but he's not been there for the past month or so, and he needs to get it back quickly, or else RNG is going to be in a position they really don't want to be in, to have to play potentially a best of 5, and worst case scenario, if they, you know, somehow choke against some of the other teams, maybe even another like 2 best of 5s in play-ins, which would be pretty disastrous for this RNG team. Gala has to step up, Ming has to step up, Wei has to step up. This was simply not good enough. I thought Breathe played relatively well in the early game, but as Jax, really, what are you going to do if the rest of the team is not able to coordinate in a 4v4 when you're winning the split push in the other lane? It doesn't matter that you're winning because the rest of the team just can't hold on. A little bit of an issue for Breathe, even though I thought he was kind of fine in this game. And like I said, I thought Xiaohu played well, but overall, I just need to see him on something more proactive than the LeBlanc. I just simply don't think you can put your best player on LeBlanc right now and expect him to be able to carry you the game. It worked for Beyond with Minji, but it's a different set of circumstances when you're playing Loud and when you're playing DRX, and I definitely think that was exploited here. Overall, definitely need to see some more out of RNG. This is not the kind of look I wanted to see. This is way, way more similar to what they had in their 2 series against EDG in playoffs and in regional finals than anything that this, you know, this super team that's been hyped up as a top 3, top 4 team in the world, because yes, they won MSI, but like, I couldn't stress this enough in my previews. This team has simply not been the sum of its parts all year long. They just have not been. You can say Spring was great, but, and you can say they have 2 players in my top 10 players at Worlds. Not a lot of other teams at this tournament can say that. In fact, very, very, very few can. RNG can say that because they're great. The other teams, JDG, TES, Gen G. Does that make them a top 4 team in the world for me? No, because they are less than the sum of their parts, and they continue to prove that over and over again until this team proves that they can compete as a full team, that players like Gala, that players like Wei can step up in a meta where they're probably the 2 most important positions on the map for RNG. Until they're proving that they can beat other teams like that consistently, how can you say that they're a top 4 team in the world? I just do not understand that. Right now, they have so much left to prove for me, especially in draft, and I really do hope that they can. But tonight is about celebrating DRX, because they did it. They conquered RNG. They don't have to play them again in play-ins. There is a very good shot DRX wins out from here on out, as long as they can beat up Mad Lions and Saigon Buffalo in a similar way to RNG here. And if they're leaving play-ins without having to play a best of 5, that is best case scenario, because if they're a strong team moving into group stage, they're likely slotted into Group C with, yes, TES, but Rogue and GAM. That's a super winnable group for DRX for them to be able to get out. If they're playing like this, I would highly, highly predict them to be able to do so, and honestly, I've gained nothing but excitement from DRX after this win. Phenomenal from this team. Alright, well that is going to do it for my Worlds coverage. Day 1 here of plans. It's all wrapped up. It's all done. I gotta say this, if you guys did enjoy the video, I can't stress this enough, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot for the channel, and it lets me know that you are enjoying the content. Most of all, obviously, I want to know if you guys are enjoying the things that I'm putting out, because we put a lot of effort into this content, and we want to make sure it's things that you want to see. I know I hold a little bit of a different niche in kind of the League community as more long-form, almost podcasty, like League analysis that's really consistent over the course of the major regions, but I definitely want to know what you guys feel about the content that's coming out. Do you like the new graphics? Do you like the way I talk about the games? If you're new to the channel, what do you think? Let me know down in the comment section below, and of course, if you do enjoy, leave that like. If you're interested in seeing more of these daily recaps, we're going to be doing them throughout Worlds, not only for play-ins, but for the BO5s, for group stage, for knockout stage, all of it. We're going to be doing reviews for all of that. If you're interested in that, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell. We're going to have videos coming out pretty much every day, so you're never going to have a lack of Worlds content coming out from this channel so long as this tournament is going. And if you don't want to miss out on those videos, I highly recommend that you do so. But it's time to talk about the player of the day and the dud of the day. This is something that I don't typically do in situations like this, but it kind of felt like a good thing to do for Worlds. Who were the players that performed really well on day 1 and the players who performed bad? I'm just going to give one for each. My player of the day in day 1, no surprise to pretty much anybody, is going to go to Upset on Fnatic. If he continues to play like this, Fnatic is going to outpace all expectations, and his synergy with Rux has been phenomenal. If he can continue this with Hylissang, Fnatic will be just fine. Upset's been incredible. And then, dud of the day, unfortunately for me, is going to go to Farfetch on the Istanbul Wildcats. Definitely need to see more out of the support from Turkey. If they really want to step up and compete at a level they need to in order to even make a best of 5 in that group of death, Group B, they really are going to have to prove a lot. And Farfetch and Holy Phoenix are going to have to get on a much better page, because he was just simply too much today for that team to be able to win with. And so, overall, Farfetch, my dud of the day, definitely can improve. Upset, my player of the day. Hope he continues his form, but that's going to do it. Like I said, like, subscribe, all that stuff. You know the jazz. I'm not going to bother you about it, but with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.